Alright, y'all, we got our first trailer, so let's get into it. Already starting off, we see Hinako surrounded by the same flowers placed by her mother's grave, in addition to red spider lilies symbolizing death in Japan, with one of the friends saying Hinako is already dead, which could be the reason they appeared before her. As we then pan to her title card, don't worry, I'll be explaining what F means later on, so stick around. Next is presumably her mother telling her that friends don't last forever, that they'll betray you eventually just as they say you did the same to them, ironically enough as we see her with her friends. As we get more shots of places we'll later see in the game, we then see the fog start to settle in, as Hinako understandably gets up to figure out what is happening. She's then pulled back to reality as her friends question if she's alright. Her mother tells her to judge them of being worthy. This is telling, as it already gives a perspective of how Hinako sees the world, even subconsciously due to this being ingrained in her as a child. We then see her first steps into Silent Hill J, as I call it, as she sees the desolate town in an open vehicle, presumably to see if there's any life inside, only to step on a dead creature. The next part I find absolutely fascinating is one of the monsters standing out as a faulty doll with a knife and scars running at Hinako, moving erratically towards her. She turns around and runs into spider lilies, only to go down an alleyway for the streetlight to shatter. She turns around to escape, where spider lilies grow all around her, literally symbolizing death closing in on her. Along with a shot of a bouquet of spider lilies as she enters a room, along with a shot of someone, yes someone, with a cracked and worn down mask, facing the camera with a cloak, as what monster would hide their face? With the same long hair as the doll. The next scene shows her with the Silent Hill signature weapon, the pipe, as she breaks the doll again, as represented by the knife shown above. With what I presume to be the fungus growing in her brain to be slowly distorting and taking over her mind, as the screen turns red and she grabs her head, only to hear her mother speak to her. As the pain grows so badly, she drops to the ground, as the world erases and the fog thickens around her. With an interesting shot of those same flowers that we saw Hinako place at her mother's grave, as she was the only one to attend the funeral, which could be very important for later. But for right now, how hilarious is it that after all her talk, no one ever found her worthy either. We then enter a shrine filled with idols of Kitsune, symbolizing good fortune, along with a Roku Rokubi, a yokai of a woman with a long neck strangling an animal, along with an altar covered with incense to ward away evil spirits. Hinako says to not have a grasp of your own feelings, most likely after encountering the Mikos, along with questioning if this could be a dream, as we get some really interesting shots of Shu, the boy from earlier, also being summoned here, which I'll come back to later as he'll be vital for Hinako's arc. We then see the multi-headed monster, representing Hinako's lack of self-worth, always having to put on another face for others due to never wanting to be betrayed or judged unworthy. While her mother told her that for her protection, she probably never thought it would have the opposite effect on her as well, never being able to find herself worthy of others and having to constantly change her face. A symbolism that has appeared in both trailers, with her face flying off only to be soon taken over by another. I've heard the next line, no Joestar, can be interpreted as Nigarandayo, or you'll never escape, or escape now, or be possessed. Both of these can work in the context of the game, but the latter half is the one that makes the most sense due to the fungus literally taking over her brain, meaning if she doesn't escape now, she will be possessed, as she did in the first trailer. We see a giant monster with the literal body of a human with hands at the ends of its tails, as you're not going to tell me those cheeks, well fired in a 2-day-old can of Coke, are not human. And honestly, how cool is it going to be for every boss fight to be accompanied by red spider lilies till the entire world is? Which I guess is a nice symbolism for death being all around you, with, you know, fungus and all taking over your brain. Which, speaking of, let's talk about that flower bed Hinako sees in her vision, as she most likely grabbed them from an isolated location and brought them to her mother's grave, which, based on the rot infecting the town, wasn't the best idea, but A for effort, as why is this only occurring now after her mother's death, or the flower's placement, as there has to be a day zero to this. The only thing I hate is that we're only missing a couple pieces to really put this all together, which I know is the point, but I really want to know what happens next. Coming back, we see the side of a shadowy figure of her mother, as how shocking would it be to see her again, whether it was out of fear or disbelief as she tried to phone for help at the school. We can tell it's the school based on the architecture, as well as on the fact that the rot hasn't engrossed the town yet, and that the fungus still hasn't fully grasped her mind yet, as we'll later see in the next scene, as there's rot all around her with the same ripped clothes as we saw at the beginning of the trailer. It's been said that the other world will be represented as rotting, so one of two things is happening here. Either A, the family meal she valued so much is rotted away, or this is how she genuinely saw the food. We saw multiple portraits of her family, but also her in front of the Tori shrine. We've seen this multiple times, meaning it will carry some significance later down the line. Next, a monster forms that looks like a pain to fight due to the range with sharp branches. Next are the drawings of Hinako covered in red paint reading die over and over again, with the eyes or face being drawn over or completely ripped off. Whoever did this clearly hates her and wants her gone. We then see a monster forming that looks like a pain to fight due to the range with sharp branches forming, but this has to be back at the schoolhouse with more than a body's worth of blood on the ground, begging the question who died here or who caused a person to rush out in distress with what I believe to be a Sankill box, with a specific melody Hinako holds dear based on the keychain and design. Next we see Shu, and this is why I believe him to be so vital even if he's going on his own journey, as the same instance applies from earlier with the drawings, as based on them we can tell we're dealing with a jealous lover here, as look at the sun spirals on the drawings, literally showcasing Shu as her light in the world, and would you look at that, she was gracious enough to sign her name. How sweet. Rinko's our culprit, so let's break down her name. Rin can mean dignified, severe, or cold, while Ko means child, so we have the dignified child with art in how she holds herself, severe child as shown in how she got Hinako to run from her chair, and her insane drawings, and cold, which is how she most likely was until she met Shu, or as well as how Shu affected her life, literally warming it and becoming a light in it. Which now that I'm thinking about it, boom, would you look at that? Now ain't that something special? Only question is, what has she done, or who did she get to literally drive her from her chair out of the classroom, or maybe having her bullied to the point of not wanting to come back to school? As remember that scarecrow that looked like her earlier? Maybe she set it up in the real world just to get her to leave, and it still lives like a trauma in her mind to see herself like that. Or maybe, could she also be hiding amongst the fog? Or is it Hinako bringing these to life herself? And does this also mean she's the one telling Shu Hinako's dead at the beginning as an opportunity to get him to forget about her? And if she's willing to do all of this, who's to say the knife wielder wasn't her? Actually, let's look back to that scene for a second. The doll is the only one in the scene and only one of 3 monsters in the game we know. It moves erratically while sounding very angry with a knife as it chases down Hinako. But if our jealous lover really, and I mean really, hated her and wanted to build a trauma so intense she'd never leave the house again or go near her dearest Shu, wouldn't chasing her down with a knife only to peer at her like this be enough? As why is it cracked? We can see the layers of the mask, and wow, is that some fine silk right there. And I'm hoping that as the game goes on, it goes based off of that trailer when we see that flashback. As how cool would it be for Hinako to be just walking around at night only for Rinko to be on demon timing trying to chase her down a dead alley, which is why then she goes down the next alley and has to turn back, as the red spider lilies literally symbolizing death could have been what Hinako thought was gonna happen at that moment, which it wasn't, because Rinko doesn't want to go to jail, obviously, but it was to go and scare off enough that literally to this day she is still fearing for her life every time she sees it. And whether it is psychological based on the fungus showing casing off of anything that's real, then that really shows how big of a trauma this is, as literally the mask of the doll is now encompassing the entirety of the body. How insane is that? Coming back, we see the fungus or rot is finally taking over as the screen shakes right and Hinako falls to the ground due to the severe pain. As her mother speaks to her, we can then be able to surmise based on the entire trailer that literally her mom's abuse of her was so detrimental that she's literally narrating 99% of the trailer, as she's going off of what her mother would judge as worthy instead of what she would. That's why it's a vocal point that Hinako brings up about not having a grasp of one's own feelings, as she doesn't even know her own, thus leading to the multi-faced monster. And if that's the case, did she care about her friends as much as she says she did? Or the stash they brought with her that her mother would be okay with? As I assume if she brought anyone over that was unworthy in her mother's eyes, she would hear about it later. And as the game will deal with child abuse, that could also explain why Hinako feels unworthy of thinking on her own, as doing anything that would be met with abuse. So instead of hearing her friends' voices, quote unquote, to encourage her, she goes to the extreme and only focuses on what her mother would think that she needs to do. As she says, I could have killed you at any time, as the world is covered in the same flowers seen at the grave of Hinako's mother. This is critical, as we see her face off against a humanoid creature covered in rot, of presumably Rinko after everything's been revealed, which would not only be climactic but makes sense, as why is she the only one we see alive, if not her as well, in the fog. We then see Hinako as Miko's of a Shinto priest worshipping a kitsune or fox. Tell her to say her farewells as they prepare something for her, hoping she truly does find happiness in this world, as they pull a knife out on her to flay her face. And I can't even blame Hinako on this one, as you're really rolling the dice on if you're in good hands, as Kitsune are known for being tricksters, but can be benevolent at times, as this is the shrine we saw her from, which should have the incense to keep out the rot. So either these people genuinely believe they're helping her, or is it a hallucinogenic to rid her of her face? As remember earlier, she said to not have a grasp of one's emotions, so maybe in an attempt to symbolically remove one of her faces till she can grasp her true self. One thing that does bug me is what they pulled at the end, as these are separate scenes, not only based on her magically getting her sleeve back, but also the layout of the room, as we see the ceiling light along with more portraits in the background. But what really bugs me is I won't know if this was on the first night of the fog settling until I get my hands on the game, as you gotta keep in mind, if this was the very first night and she's already feeling her face ripping off, do you know how crazy that sounds and how bad it must be later? With that being said, I had a lot of fun writing this. Again, if you have any theories on what else is going on, drop them below. I'd be happy to read them. Till next time, take care.